Honourable Leader of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Madam President. Good morning, Senators. Madam President, before I speak to this motion, I just wish to just share for my own inspiration a Psalm 149, 23, 24, which, when I read into your hearing, Madam President, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Madam President, just in a mere response to the presentation I've heard from the Leader of Government Business, and understanding the difficulty in coming to this Honorable House to seek for an extension of the state of emergency powers of the government. And as she mentioned, as the member mentioned, the issue of testing, I reflected and asked myself, Madam President, if we had the means of testing sincerity in this Honorable House, whether it would have added more value to this debate, a test of sincerity. Madam President, the state of emergency is a situation in which is empowered to perform actions or impose policies that it would normally not be permitted to undertake. Madam President, somewhere I read that the states of emergency can also be used as a rationale or pretext for suspending rights and freedoms guaranteed under a country's constitution. Madam President, there are many St. Lucians that do not understand what is meant by a state of emergency, or what rights they are relinquishing to the government or the executive. Madam President, just in terms of a summary, the Constitution of St. Lucia, the supreme law, secures our fundamental rights and freedoms. Liberty, the person, equality before the law, freedom of conscience, of expression, of assembly and association, protection of family, personal privacy, privacy of one's home, protection from slavery, protection from arbitrary search, freedom of movement. Madam President, as some of the freedoms and rights as enshrined in our Constitution for St. Lucians. What is meant by a state of emergency, Madam President, is for a St. Lucian to relinquish some of those fundamental basic rights to the executive. Madam President, and as I reflect on it in the authority, maybe the police, in that regard can detain you for a specific period without an explanation, maybe 7 days, as I reflected on the Constitution. Your home can be searched without a warrant. You can be removed. You can ask not to congregate. These are some of those fundamental rights. Madam President, it is understood generally by St. Lucians that the government must act quickly in an emergency, and some leniency, or what we consider to be restriction of personal liberties, is given as it relates to the government actions. And of course, it is during some times of crisis, as was mentioned, natural disasters, civil unrest, armed conflict, pandemic or epidemic, or even some biosecurity reasons. And that this must be done in good faith for the preservation of public health, safety, or order. And therefore, Madam President, it is in that vein that the patriotic opposition, with a caring leader, supported the government in the early request, or not to question, or remain at peace in the first request of the state of emergency, and even, I think it was asked for a second time, 26 days. However, Madam President, the government cannot arbitrarily liberties that don't and do not have a legitimate purpose. And therefore, after listening, Madam President, to the Prime Minister yesterday and observing the silence of the entire cabinet was represented in the lower house, as if they were saying to the Prime Minister, I cannot add my voice to yours in that regard, but I can only say yes if it matters. I am concerned, Madam President, about the extension of the state of emergency powers. Why move from 26 days to 122 days? Madam President, what is interesting, I didn't hear the Prime Minister state or cite how did the state of emergency earlier on specifically contributed success. How did it contribute success to what has been achieved thus far as it relates to our fight on COVID-19? What were the specific situation of success that can be attributed to the state of emergency? Madam President, understanding also that some of the provisions mentioned or some of the powers under the state of emergency, that also is available under the Public Health Act and also under the Quarantine Act. I'm asking why a state of emergency? Madam President, in a society where the perception is that the poor people are not treated as under the law as same as those who are well, how comfortable and how relaxed can I be, or members of the opposition be, as it relates to the state of emergency in this time, in this environment, and without justification being presented and the silence by other members of the lower house? Madam President, it's also very much concerning that the police, who is an authority in administering a state of emergency, Madam President, it is very uncomfortable when the Prime Minister refers to the police as my police. And when the Prime Minister's wife is also a patron of the police force, it is worrying for me, Madam President. The police cannot have a patron. The police, no one can appear to be giving gifts to the police. It is concerning. Madam President, must be seen to be totally independent as far as I'm concerned. Madam President, like the treasury that is without money, so are the hearts of many St. Lucians with no more trust of this government. And in the context of the Prime Minister's presentation and the silence of his members of cabinet, clearly there isn't any justification for the state of emergency. Madam President, I wouldn't be surprised if the 5 members or the 5 senators on this side, I think they're the only quintuplets left of the UWPs who would say otherwise. But Madam President, there is a serious concern. Without rehashing, Madam, the chronology or the sequences that led to where we are today, I know the question that was asked in former sitting is, has there been an abuse of power? Has there been an abuse of power? And Madam President, I can comfortably say, yes, there has been. And you dare ask, Madam President, what has been the abuse of power? Madam President, I was shocked and saddened by the demolition of the old prison during the state of emergency. I'll tell you why, Madam President. Madam President, when I did my master's thesis in London, I had to choose an elective, and I did history of architecture. Myself and my cousin in London, South Bank University. And Madam President, whereas I did architecture, drafting at Sir Arthur Lewis, I did some technology when I did my degree in Jamaica. Selecting history of architecture as an elective among a number of Europeans had me to be exposed to some things that we take for granted. Madam President, in doing my final to get out of university at my master thesis, Madam President, we had to select a very old cathedral that was only available somewhere in Scotland and somewhere in France, the age of that, for us to do our final thesis. My cousin and I were there together. We decided we don't want to do a group approach, and we decided that we couldn't travel this far and decided to do St. Paul's Cathedral. Madam President, it exposed me to a lot. I had the opportunity to go into the archives in London and revisit the old sermons that were preached back then in the 1200s, understanding the issues of the design and why it was set up, Madam President. But more amazing, Madam President, during those lectures, when the lecturer would ask the question, how many of you have visited the Wall of China? And I saw so many hands of the Europeans went up. How many of you have visited the Great Pyramid of Giza? I saw so many hands, and I said, wow, where am I from? A different part of this world. And I knew, Madam President, then that there is something special about old. But I was able to connect it, Madam President, to something more beautiful. I grew up with my great-grandmother and my grandmother. And every time, Madam President, we had to distinguish between my great-grandmother and my grandmother and my sister. Say, we ask, who is calling? They say, old mommy. Because my great-grandmother was called old mommy. Not old because she was derelict. She was one of the most loving. We almost preferred her more than our grandmother who whipped us. She was dark and tall. Madam President, when I listened to the debate and the discussion about the prison, I asked, would China demolish the Great Wall of China, which is just a wall? Would they have demolished, if they were Egyptians, the Great Pyramid of Giza? Madam President, this building out there, 24 inches thick wall out of clay bricks. And my engineering experience tells me it survived fire, hurricanes, and floods. It was there before some of the buildings that are in pastries. One of the last buildings left of an interesting story. We could not see value in it because old for us means useless and wasted. I do not blame a lot of my St. Lucians for sometimes referring to the old lady in the way that they say, the old lady, the old building. But Madam President, only yesterday I sat in a barber's shop right across Saucy Road, and I tell the barber, paying attention, I tell him, look at a window across the road from an old building, Madam President. It had the wooden louvers and it had the shutters. These windows and shutters, Madam President, secured us from hurricanes, some of which we don't even appreciate. We buy what we call Chinese windows, and they call it hurricane shutters, and the glass break. But the wooden windows with the shutters and the louvers at the back, as most of the buildings in Castries, are so valuable. Valuable. And Madam President, as I put my own valuation surveying skills to this, I would tell you, Madam President, we could not even purchase it. So you ask me, Madam President, has there been an abuse? 10,000 square foot of asset in this heart of the city of Castries? Of course, Madam President. And when I listened to the explanation or the non-explanation for such demolition, I was even appalled, Madam President. Was there a contract? Is there a contract to build a new one? I asked myself those questions. But more important, Madam President, I just wish to, just a short statement. This is really a standard building contract, Madam President, which is used in London, across the world, in the Commonwealth. And Madam President, there is a clause they call antiquities. And it says, and I just wish this, it's a standard form of contract, all fossils, antiquities, and other objects of interest or value which may be found on a site or in excavating the same during the progress of the work shall become the property of the employer, and upon discovery of such an object, the contractor shall forthwith cease the works. This is a basic British standard form of contract for works, meaning that when you are implementing works and you come across something, you stop. Value is there. If the foundations, Madam President, of this building was not seen and works were being undertaken, and the contractor, according to the JCT form of contract, joint tribunal committee of contractors, that they came across that foundation, they automatically would have to stop value, because it becomes the property of the employer. Madam President, the superstructure was there, not just the foundation, the superstructure. But we've put a bulldozer and we demolished 24 inches thick brick wall. Madam President, there are no expertise to reproduce that in St. Lucia currently. We do not have the means of doing it. That is an abuse. So, Madam President, I ask the question, what are we doing with such powers of emergency? How do you trust a government under the dark clouds of the state of emergency would demolish such an asset belonging to the state? Madam President, it pains me to think of this. And this is pure professional. And I listened to the discussion, Madam President, of persons calling it an old building. And I said, my goodness, we have a lot of work to do with our people, Madam President. A lot of work. At our educational level, Madam President, it's sad that we cut the support or subvention of the National Trust in that regard. But they would have a lot of work to do in terms of educating our populace and how we relate to our environment. Madam President, we've come to a point post-COVID where all we have is what is ours, what is St. Lucian. We have nothing left. Madam President, I have envisaged as a professional and expect that some commercial properties will go down in value because some churches have become smaller. Some hotels have become smaller based on the new COVID protocols. I read somewhere that it is now 30 square feet per person to now congregate in a church. I saw some small congregations as I drove by. I said, oh, they're going to be 2 persons, one probably in the middle and maybe someone at the door. And Woe be unto those persons who believe the establishment of small buildings they call church were actually churches, because there's no room to congregate. This is the new normal. So these properties designed as churches are no longer churches for the intended purposes, and of course would be devalued. A hotel which was designed to accommodate 500 guests with new protocol, how many can it accommodate? It has been devalued. You know what has increased in value, Madam President? Agricultural properties. Because food security is the new talk. And recently there, when I went to Renwick, all compost was completely sold out. None. Everybody, there's a demand to go into agriculture all of a sudden. And whereas, Madam President, I reflect on it, there may be a silver lining in this. So I ask the leaders of this country, the government, and even with the opposition, how do we respond in such a times? I do not think it and build on the foundation that has been established. We have the skilled person, Madam President. We have architects in St. Lucia who have been all over the world to be trained to know how to incorporate these things into new buildings. And the other part of it, Madam President, is the maintenance. Oh, Madam President, we build these new waterfront buildings up there, Madam President. I worked in them. I had to work with the government to maintain them. Madam President, they're so expensive to maintain. These buildings, the barracks, are cheaper to maintain. Cheaper. And I said, what's wrong with us? We call it old. Madam President, on Manuel Street, there was a building built with the modern technology of steel frame with the in-core, what you call what stabilizes this building is really an in-core of an elevator shaft going up. It had to be demolished. These buildings could have remained there, Madam President. The waterfront buildings would have been demolished before them, because there are buildings of that quality that over 500 years old in London. There's some that over 1,000 years. But we call it old and we demolish it. Such an abuse. Madam President, assuming that persons who did that, you didn't know better. I ask the question, what do we do? Madam President, in my own mind, in my humble opinion to what is before us at this point in time, we need to strengthen the civil society. We need to strengthen those organizations that is part and contribute to our commonwealth, the wealth of St. Lucia. We need to respect and honor them. We need to invest in them. When the National Trust speak on behalf of saving what's there, they're not advancing their cause, they're contributing to another lockbox of the wealth of St. Lucia. Our assets, our heritage. That lockbox is very important, Madam President. So, Madam President, as I say my last view on this, I'm asking, if the worst supposedly has passed, if, as the leader of government business indicated, that we are now in a safe place, and I quote her, and when Madam Leader of Government Business indicated that we are now in a safe place, I quickly looked up the definition of safe. Protected from or not exposed to risk or likely harm. If we have reached a safe place, why are we extending the state of emergency from 26 days to 122 days? What is the motive? Madam President, and if the worst has not left us, why are we opening up to other jurisdictions based on the own pronouncement made by the leader of government business. Madam President, during the height of COVID-19, when we were all afraid as to what would become of St. Lucia, what would happen to us, or the government had the latitude. Maybe the leader, the member on the independent member did speak in terms of highlighting the gravity of what was at the time the state of emergency, what powers we were given up. But even the opposition then, not being aware as to what is coming at us, we said, you go have your way, save us if you can. It was just 26 days. Now you say, now we're in the safe zone. You come to this house and ask for 122 days more. Parliamentary oversight of such powers is necessary. Madam President, 4 months, it will be difficult for us to oversee these powers. Madam President, there are other approaches that we adopt to deal with the issue of waves, what we consider waves of COVID. Madam President, public education needs to continue. Madam President, I haven't seen in the presentation made by the Prime Minister what the justification for the 122 days. He indicated that the public has cooperated with the government. Madam President, if St. Lucians have cooperated with the government and have given up their rights, their liberties for 26 days and 26 days, and you say we are now in the safe zone, why continue to restrict them in that way for another 122 days? Madam President, I do not believe, I will even ask the question. I will not ask the question, has the public not been cooperative? But if not, I would ask what measures should be put in place to achieve further cooperation from the public. But certainly, it wouldn't be a state of emergency. Madam President, what was the benefits? Again, I heard some mentioning of, but it was not clear enough. What are the benefits for further extension? State of emergency? And what is the cost? What is the cost to us? How has it affected us and other St. Lucians? What is that cost to St. Lucians for the state of emergency?
Senator,
what is it?
You have 15 more minutes.
Thank you, Madam President. I will finish within that time. Madam President. Madam President, the Prime Minister also indicated that we remain susceptible. And Madam President, I honestly was trying to understand and still trying to grapple with the issue of the understanding of COVID, as been mentioned by the medical professionals, both here and abroad. I'm saying, if we are susceptible to COVID in the way that is being displayed out there, why open up this country? There is something that is contradicting, Madam President. There is a big contradiction, and this is gonna lead us into problems. Let our yea be yea or nay be nay. It's either we are safe or we are not. We cannot send mixed signals to the public. This will create a problem for us, Madam President. And I am, Madam President, and I said it at the last sitting, St. Lucians, we have some things that we all have in common. And I saw it on the morning after curfew when I went to the supermarket. I went there and I saw a line so long, I asked myself why these people came there, but I had to ask myself, what is it I heard I came there? We all interpret things the same way. So all St. Lucians decided to go by the supermarket for a number of days, and the queue was very long. And if you ask yourself, what were you doing there? you're almost not too sure, but all St. Lucians responded to something that they heard. Madam President, I'm saying based on what is happening there, we are sending the wrong signals to St. Lucians, and it will lead to problems. Madam President, there are times as St. Lucians we need to move beyond the mere discussion of Parliament. And we need to search our own heart, our own conscience, and answer some fundamental questions. And this morning, Madam President, I think this is a historical time for us to really put some differences aside, if we can, and respond to some fundamental question as to what is needed, what is necessary. And I ask the members on the government side, I ask the members of the government side, do not support an extension of the state of emergency. It is not good for this country at this time. I'm asking the members on the government side, not vote to support. It is not. I'm asking the government side. No, I'm not asking the independent. I'm asking you on the other side. You're directly opposite me. You understand? I'm asking that you do not support this. I thank you, Madam President.